The thunder of hooves against hard, packed earth drowned out Abigail Parker's heartbeat as she watched the approaching rider from her porch, rifle balanced across her lap. Dust billowed behind the stranger, golden in the late afternoon sun of 1875 Arizona territory. She'd seen his kind before: drifters, cowboys, men who promised the world and disappeared with the dawn. Promises in Redemption Creek ran as dry as the riverbed most summers. "That's far enough," Abigail called when the rider was within earshot, lifting her Winchester just enough to make her meaning clear. The man reined his horse to a stop, raising his hands slightly in a gesture of peace. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his weather-beaten hat. "Name's Gabriel Reed. I heard you might have work." Abigail studied him from beneath the shadow of the porch roof. Tall even on horseback, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of the sky after a storm. His clothes were dusty but not ragged, his gear well-maintained. The horse beneath him, a fine chestnut stallion, looked healthy and well cared for. "Who told you that?" she asked, not lowering the rifle. "Station master in town said the Parker place might need a hand since." He trailed off, seeming to search for the right words. "Since my husband died," Abigail finished for him, her voice flat. "That was 3 years ago." Gabriel nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for your loss, madam." "I've managed fine," she said, though the strain of running the ranch alone had nearly broken her. Drought had taken half her cattle last year, and rustlers had helped themselves to more. The bank was making noises about the mortgage. The ranch hands had drifted away one by one, seeking steadier pay elsewhere. "I'm sure you have," Gabriel said, "but every ranch can use an extra pair of hands." "I'm good with cattle, better with horses. I can mend fences, dig wells, and I don't cause trouble." Abigail's gaze drifted to the empty bunkhouse, the sagging fence line, the cattle pens that needed repair before winter. She needed help desperately, but she'd been down this road before. Men came, promised to stay, then left when the work got too hard or a better opportunity presented itself. "I can't pay much," she said finally, lowering the rifle slightly. "Room and board and a small wage paid when I sell the next herd." Gabriel nodded. "That'll do fine, Mrs. Parker." "Miss," she corrected, "I was widowed before I was truly a wife. 3 months of marriage before Thomas was thrown from his horse and broke his neck. Barely time to learn each other's habits, let alone build a life." "Miss Parker, then," Gabriel amended. "I'd be obliged for the work." Abigail hesitated, then lowered the rifle completely. "The bunkhouse is empty. You can take your pick of bunks. There's a pump out back for washing. Supper's at sundown." "Thank you, Miss Parker." "Don't thank me yet," Abigail said, rising from her chair. "And Mr. Reed. I've had men come through here before, promising to stay on to help. They all leave eventually, so don't make promises you can't keep." Gabriel's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "I don't make promises lightly, Miss Parker." Abigail's laugh was short and bitter. "That's what they all say." She turned and went inside, closing the door firmly behind her. Through the window, she watched as Gabriel Reed led his horse toward the barn, his gait unhurried but purposeful. Another drifter, another temporary solution. She'd learned not to hope for more. When Gabriel arrived at the house for supper, he'd cleaned up considerably. His dark hair was damp from washing, his face freshly shaved save for a close-trimmed mustache. He'd changed into a clean shirt, though it was worn at the cuffs. "Smells good," he said, standing awkwardly at the kitchen door. Abigail gestured to the table set for two. "It's just stew and biscuits, nothing fancy. Been eating my own cooking for months. Anything not burned is fancy to me." A ghost of a smile touched Abigail's lips before she could stop it. She served the food in silence, watching as Gabriel waited for her to sit before picking up his spoon. "Manners, at least, that was something. You've come a long way," she asked after a few minutes of quiet eating. Gabriel nodded. "Started in Texas, worked my way west. Been on the move since the war ended." "That's a long time to drift," Abigail observed. "Some men never settle," he said, breaking a biscuit in half. "But I've been thinking lately it might be time." Abigail had heard similar sentiments before. Men like Gabriel Reed always thought they wanted to settle until the reality of it pressed down on them, the daily grind, the same views. the responsibilities that couldn't be left behind when the horizon called. And what brings you to Redemption Creek? It's hardly on the way to anywhere. Gabriel chewed thoughtfully before answering. Heard it was good cattle country before the drought, thought it might be a place worth seeing. It was good country once, Abigail agreed, looking out the window toward the mountains that rimmed the valley. My father brought us here when I was 12, built this house, built up the herd. When he died, my husband was supposed to take over. She stopped, the familiar ache settling in her chest. But plans change. They do at that, Gabriel said quietly. After supper, Gabriel insisted on washing the dishes, his large hands surprisingly careful with Abigail's mother's china. She found herself watching him, this stranger who had ridden into her life as so many had before. I'll be up at dawn, she told him as he dried the last plate. There's fence that needs mending in the north pasture. We can start there. Yes, madam, Gabriel said. I'll be ready. Abigail nodded, then hesitated. Mr. Reed. Gabriel, please, Gabriel. His name felt strange on her tongue. I want to be clear, this arrangement is temporary. I need help getting the ranch back in shape, but once that's done, you'll have no obligation to keep me on, he finished for her. I understand, Miss Parker. Abigail, she corrected, then wondered why she'd offered that familiarity. Abigail, he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her chest tighten. I'll see you at dawn. Abigail watched from her bedroom window as Gabriel crossed the yard to the bunkhouse, his figure outlined against the deepening twilight. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would maintain more distance. It wouldn't do to get attached to another temporary solution. True to his word, Gabriel was waiting by the barn when Abigail emerged from the house at first light. He had already saddled both his horse and hers, a black mare named Midnight that was particular about who handled her. She let you saddle her? Abigail asked, surprised. Gabriel patted Midnight's neck. We came to an understanding. Abigail's skepticism must have shown on her face because Gabriel added, I've always had a way with horses, more than people sometimes. That's a useful skill on a ranch, Abigail acknowledged, taking Midnight's reins. The mare nuzzled her shoulder in greeting, seemingly at ease. They rode to the north pasture side by side, the morning air still cool enough that their breath fogged slightly. The first rays of sun gilded the grass, making the dew sparkle like scattered diamonds. It's beautiful country, Gabriel said, looking around at the rolling landscape that spread toward distant mountains. It can be, Abigail agreed, when it's not trying to kill you with drought or blizzards or flash floods. Gabriel laughed, a warm sound that startled Abigail with its genuineness. Fair enough, beauty and danger often go hand in hand. At the fence line, they dismounted and surveyed the damage. Several posts had rotted at the base, allowing the wire to sag. In places, the wire itself had broken. Looks like we'll need to replace at least 5 posts, Gabriel observed, testing one that wobbled in the ground, and restoring this whole section. There's lumber in the barn, Abigail said, and tools, but it's a lot for one day. Then we'll do what we can today and finish tomorrow, Gabriel replied, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. As if tomorrow were guaranteed, they worked steadily through the morning, digging out the rotted posts and setting new ones. Gabriel's experience showed in his efficiency, and Abigail found herself working alongside him with surprising ease. By midday, they'd replaced 3 posts and were preparing to string new wire. You've done this before, Abigail observed as they paused to drink from their canteens. Gabriel wiped his brow with his sleeve. More times than I can count, fence always needs mending no matter where you are, and where all have you been? Abigail asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Texas, mostly, worked on a few spreads there, then Colorado, New Mexico. He took another drink before continuing. Drove cattle up to Montana one summer. That was something to see country so wide open it makes a man feel small. And yet you keep moving, Abigail noted. Gabriel was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. After the war, standing still felt impossible, too many ghosts. Abigail understood ghosts. She lived with them daily, her father's laugh in an empty room, her husband's footsteps on the porch that never materialized. The war changed everything for a lot of people. It did at that, Gabriel agreed. But enough about my wandering. How did you end up running this ranch alone? Most widows would have sold up, moved to town. Abigail's chin lifted slightly. This land was my father's dream. He worked himself to death for it. I wasn't about to let it go just because I had the misfortune of losing my husband. Stubborn, Gabriel observed with a small smile. Determined, Abigail corrected. Both, I'd wager. Gabriel stood, offering her a hand up. Shall we get back to it? Abigail hesitated before taking his hand, noticing the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. His grip was firm but gentle as he helped her to her feet, and he released her hand as soon as she was steady, respecting her space. By sunset, they had replaced all 5 posts and restrung most of the wire. Abigail's muscles ached from the unaccustomed labor. She'd been doing what she could alone, but some jobs simply required more hands than she possessed. We'll finish tomorrow, Gabriel said as they gathered their tools. Another few hours should do it. Abigail nodded, too tired to argue. You're a hard worker, Mr. Reed. Gabriel, he reminded her, and thank you. My father believed a job worth doing was worth doing right. Wise man. He was, Gabriel agreed, a shadow crossing his face. He didn't live to see the end of the war. Abigail felt a pang of sympathy. So many had lost so much in those terrible years. I'm sorry. Gabriel nodded his acknowledgement, then changed the subject. Your cattle look healthy despite the drought. That speaks well of your management. I've been lucky, Abigail said. The spring on our property never completely dried up, even in the worst of it, and I sold off what I couldn't feed before they starved. Not luck. Good sense, Gabriel corrected. Many a rancher has lost everything trying to keep too many head through a bad season. The compliment warmed Abigail more than it should have. She'd been making these decisions alone for so long, with no one to tell her if she was right or wrong. Back at the ranch, they cared for the horses together before Gabriel headed to the bunkhouse to clean up for supper. Abigail watched him go, a strange feeling settling in her chest. It had been a long time since she'd had help, since she'd had company beyond the occasional visit from neighbors or the infrequent trip into town. It felt good. And that was dangerous. Over the next 2 weeks, Gabriel proved his worth 100 times over. They finished the fence line, repaired the cattle pens, and cleared a clogged irrigation ditch that had been causing problems for months. He rose before dawn each day and worked until dusk, never complaining, often anticipating what needed to be done before Abigail mentioned it. The evenings developed a routine supper together at Abigail's table, conversation that grew less stilted as the days passed, and occasionally a game of checkers by lamplight. Gabriel told stories of his travels that made Abigail laugh despite herself, and she found herself sharing memories of her childhood on the ranch that she'd thought forgotten. My father used to say that ranching gets in your blood, she told Gabriel one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. That once you've lived with this much sky above you, nothing else feels right. He wasn't wrong, Gabriel said, his voice soft with appreciation for the view. I've seen a lot of country, but there's something about this place. Yet you'll move on eventually, Abigail said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Gabriel turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Not all who wander are lost, Abigail. Sometimes a man just needs to find the right place to stop. Abigail wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her better. The last hand I hired stayed 6 months. Said he'd found paradise here and would never leave. Then a letter came from California about gold and he was gone the next day. I'm not looking for gold, Gabriel said. Everyone's looking for something, Abigail countered. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. Maybe so. But what I'm looking for isn't found by running toward the next horizon. Before Abigail could ask what he meant, a rider appeared in the distance, approaching fast. She rose, instantly alert. Visitors at this hour were rarely bearers of good news. The rider turned out to be young Billy Thompson from the neighboring ranch, his face flushed with exertion. Miss Parker, Pa sent me to warn you. There's rustlers working the area. They hit the Morrison place last night, took 20 head. Pa's organizing a group to track them come morning. Abigail's stomach dropped. She couldn't afford to lose any cattle, not with the bank breathing down her neck. "Thank you, Billy. Tell your father we'll keep watch tonight." After Billy rode off, Gabriel turned to Abigail. "I'll saddle up and check the herd." "I'm coming with you," Abigail said, already heading toward the barn. Gabriel looked like he might object but thought better of it. "We'll need rifles." The night was clear, stars pricking the vast expanse of sky as they rode toward the pasture where the main herd grazed. The cattle were settled, a good sign. Rustlers would have stirred them up. "Let's make a circuit of the property," Gabriel suggested. "Cover all the approaches." They rode in companionable silence, alert for any sign of intruders. At the western boundary, Gabriel suddenly raised a hand, signaling Abigail to stop. He pointed toward a small grove of cottonwoods that marked a bend in the creek. "Campfire," he whispered. Abigail squinted, making out the faint glow among the trees. "Could be travelers." "Could be," Gabriel agreed. "Or it could be our rustlers, waiting for the ranch to settle for the night." "Let's find out," Abigail said, her hand moving to her rifle. Gabriel nodded and they dismounted, tethering their horses to a scrub juniper. They approached the grove on foot, moving quietly through the tall grass. As they drew closer, Abigail could make out voices, 3, maybe 4 men. "Easy pickings," one was saying. "Woman running it alone, barely any hands left. Morrison said she's got about 60 head worth taking." "And they say she's a looker, too," another laughed. "Maybe we should pay her a personal visit after we've got the cattle." Abigail's blood ran cold. Gabriel's hand found her arm in the darkness, steadying her. 4 of them, he breathed in her ear. Armed. "We need to get back to the ranch, get prepared." Abigail nodded, and they began to retreat as silently as they'd come. But fate intervened. Abigail's foot found a dry branch, which snapped with a crack that seemed loud as a gunshot in the quiet night. What was that? One of the men called, and suddenly there was movement in the camp. "Run," Gabriel hissed, and they bolted for their horses. Behind them, shouts rang out, followed by the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. Abigail reached her mare first, scrambling into the saddle as Gabriel swung up onto his stallion. They were just turning to flee when a shot cracked through the night, the bullet whistling past Abigail's ear. Gabriel's response was immediate. He drew his revolver and fired twice toward the rustlers, not aiming to hit but to give them pause. It worked. The men ducked for cover, giving Abigail and Gabriel precious seconds to put distance between them. They rode hard back to the ranch, not slowing until the house was in sight. Abigail's heart pounded in her chest, fear and anger mingling in equal measure. "They'll come tonight," she said as they dismounted in the yard. "They know we've spotted them." Gabriel nodded grimly. "How many rifles do you have?" "3, and my father's old shotgun." "Good, we'll need to barricade the house. It's more defensible than the barn." They worked quickly, moving furniture to block the windows, gathering ammunition, filling buckets with water in case the rustlers tried to smoke them out. Gabriel seemed to know what he was doing, issuing instructions that Abigail followed without question. "You've done this before," she observed as they positioned a heavy oak table against the kitchen door. "Once or twice," Gabriel admitted. "The war taught me more about defense than I ever wanted to know." When everything was ready, they settled in to wait, rifles at the ready. The hours stretched, tense and silent. Abigail found herself studying Gabriel's profile in the dim light of the single lamp they'd left burning, the strong line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes never stopped scanning the darkness beyond the windows. "You're good in a crisis," she said softly. Gabriel's mouth quirked in a half smile. "Had my share of practice." "What did you do in the war?" "Cavalry at first," Gabriel replied. "Then scout. I knew the country in East Texas better than most." Abigail was about to ask more when a movement outside caught her eye. "There," she whispered, pointing to a shadow that detached itself from the barn. Gabriel nodded, his finger moving to the trigger of his rifle. "I see him. There'll be others trying to surround us." As if confirming his words, Abigail spotted another figure moving along the fence line. "What's their plan, do you think?" "They want the cattle, but they know we're armed and waiting," Gabriel said. "They'll try to drive us out or wait us out." "There's no one coming to help until morning," Abigail said, remembering Billy's message. "They know that too," Gabriel's expression hardened. "Then we make them regret coming at all." The attack, when it came, was coordinated. A fusillade of shots shattered the windows on the east side of the house, while two men rushed the front porch. Gabriel fired through a gap in the barricade, catching one of the attackers in the shoulder. The man went down with a cry, and his companion dragged him back to cover. "That'll make them think twice," Gabriel said, reloading, but the rustlers weren't deterred for long. A burning brand came sailing through a broken window, landing on the rug. Abigail rushed to stamp it out while Gabriel provided covering fire. The next hour was a blur of smoke, gunfire, and tense waiting. The rustlers tried repeatedly to approach the house, but Gabriel's accurate shooting kept them at bay. Abigail proved herself a capable defender as well, winging one of the attackers as he tried to reach the back door. "We can't keep this up all night," she said as dawn approached, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "They'll rush us eventually." Gabriel checked their ammunition, frowning. "We're running low on bullets too." Just as the situation seemed most dire, a new sound reached them, hoofbeats, many of them approaching fast from the east. The rustlers heard it too, their gunfire paused. "Thompson," Abigail breathed. "He must have gathered men earlier than planned." Sure enough, a large group of riders appeared, led by Joseph Thompson from the neighboring ranch. The rustlers, outnumbered and outgunned, made a break for it, fleeing toward the west. Several of Thompson's men gave chase while the others secured the ranch. Abigail and Gabriel emerged from the house, smoke-stained and weary but unharmed. Joseph Thompson, a burly man with a gray-streaked beard, dismounted to greet them. "Miss Parker, when we saw the smoke, we feared the worst. We're all right, thanks to Mr. Reed," Abigail said, suddenly aware of how close she was standing to Gabriel. Thompson eyed Gabriel appraisingly. "You've got yourself a good hand there, Miss Parker. Not many would stand against 4 armed rustlers." "5, corrected one of Thompson's men, returning from tracking the fleeing bandits. "We caught 2 of them. They said there were 5 altogether." Gabriel frowned. "We only saw 4. A chill ran down Abigail's spine. The 5th one, she never finished her sentence. A shot rang out from the direction of the barn, and Gabriel shoved her roughly to the ground, covering her with his body as bullets kicked up dust around them. Thompson's men returned fire, and there was a cry from the barn, followed by silence. "Got him," someone called. Gabriel lifted himself off Abigail, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, breathless from the fall and the weight of him. "You saved my life." "Just returning the favor," he said, helping her to her feet. "You took me in when you had every reason not to trust a stranger." Thompson's men dragged the 5th rustler from the barn alive but wounded in the leg. "What should we do with him, Miss Parker? The others are tied up by the creek." "Take them all to the sheriff in town," Abigail said firmly. "Let the law handle them." It was mid-morning by the time Thompson and his men departed, taking the rustlers with them. The ranch was quiet again, though signs of the night's battle were everywhere: broken windows, bullet holes in the walls, scorch marks on the porch. Abigail stood in the yard, surveying the damage with a heavy heart. Repairs would cost money she didn't have. But at least the cattle were safe, and she was alive to worry about the rest. Gabriel joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her, and their fingers brushed in the exchange, sending an unexpected warmth through Abigail's tired body. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the coffee. Gabriel understood. "You would have done the same for me." Yes, she realized, I would have. The admission surprised her. They drank their coffee in companionable silence, watching as the sun rose higher in the sky, burning away the lingering haze of gunsmoke. "I should start boarding up those windows," Gabriel said finally, "before the weather turns." Abigail nodded, but a question burned in her mind. "Why did you stay? Last night you could have run. Most hired hands would have." Gabriel looked at her, really looked at her, his blue eyes serious. "I told you when I arrived, Abigail, I don't make promises lightly. I said I'd work for you, and that means seeing things through. Even when it means risking your life, especially then," he said simply. Abigail felt something shift inside her, a wall beginning to crumble. but old habits died hard. "You'll leave eventually," she said, though the words lacked their earlier conviction. "Everyone does." Gabriel set down his empty cup on a fence post. "You know, my pa used to say that people who have been hurt expect to be hurt again. It's natural." "But sometimes, Abigail, sometimes people surprise you." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "I'll be here tomorrow and the day after that, for as long as you'll have me." The promise hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Abigail wanted to believe it, wanted it more than she'd allowed herself to want anything in years. "We should get to work," she said finally, unable to find words for the emotions swelling in her chest. "Those windows won't board themselves." Gabriel smiled, a slow, understanding smile that reached his eyes. "Yes, madam." As they worked side by side to repair the damage from the night's attack, Abigail found herself watching Gabriel when he wasn't looking, the careful precision of his hands, the strength in his shoulders, the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair. He had proven himself a man of his word, a man of courage and principle. A man unlike any she had known before. Perhaps, just perhaps, he would be the one to stay. The days following the rustler attack fell into a new rhythm. Word of the incident spread through the surrounding ranches, and neighbors stopped by to offer help with repairs. Gabriel coordinated these efforts with quiet efficiency, directing the work while ensuring Abigail's preferences were respected. Joseph Thompson and his eldest son brought lumber from town. The blacksmith rode out with metal fittings for the new windows. Even the sheriff paid a visit, informing them that the rustlers would stand trial in the territorial court. "You've made quite an impression around here, Reed," the sheriff observed as he prepared to leave. "Folks are saying if you hadn't been here, Miss Parker might not have fared so well." Gabriel shook his head. "They underestimate her. She's tougher than she looks." The sheriff chuckled. "That she is. Still, a woman alone on a ranch this size, it's not right. Good to see she's got someone reliable now." After the sheriff rode away, Abigail approached Gabriel where he was measuring a window frame. "You didn't have to defend me," she said. "I know what people think." Gabriel looked up from his work. "It wasn't a defense, it was the truth. You were holding this place together long before I arrived." His matter-of-fact acknowledgement of her capability touched Abigail deeply. So many men, including her late husband, if she was honest, had treated her as delicate, in need of protection rather than partnership. "Still," she said, "I'm glad you were here that night." Gabriel's eyes met hers, warm with something that made her heart quicken. "So am I." As October gave way to November, the ranch began to prosper under their joint efforts. The repaired irrigation system allowed a late cutting of hay. The cattle gained weight on the improved grazing. Gabriel even managed to break a wild Mustang that had been haunting the North Range, adding a valuable horse to Abigail's small remuda. They settled into a comfortable domesticity that surprised Abigail with its ease. Mornings began with coffee shared at the kitchen table, planning the day's work. Evenings ended with supper and conversation that stretched later as the nights grew longer. Gabriel taught Abigail to play poker, using matchsticks instead of money. She taught him to make her mother's apple pie when the small orchard behind the house yielded its late harvest. And all the while, something grew between them, unspoken but undeniable. It was Gabriel who finally addressed it, on a crisp November evening as they sat by the fire after supper. He had been unusually quiet, and Abigail had sensed he had something on his mind. "I've been thinking," he began, his eyes on the dancing flames, "about the future." Abigail's heart stuttered. Here it was the moment when he would tell her he was moving on. Despite everything, despite his promise, men always left eventually. She steeled herself for the pain. "I've saved most of my wages," Gabriel continued. "Not much, but enough for a start." "A start," Abigail echoed, her voice carefully neutral. Gabriel turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I thought I might build a place of my own. Nothing grand, just a small cabin to begin with." Abigail felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. So he was staying in the area, but not with her. Somehow, that seemed worse than if he'd announced he was heading to California or back to Texas. "I see," she managed. "You found land you like." Gabriel's mouth quirked in that half-smile that had become so dear to her. I have. About 50 yards from this house, on that rise with the old oak tree, if the owner agrees, of course. Abigail stared at him, understanding dawning slowly. That's on my property. It is, Gabriel agreed. Which is why I need your permission. You want to build a cabin. Here, Gabriel set aside his coffee cup and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. The gesture was so unexpected that Abigail could only gaze at him in wonder. Abigail Parker, he said, his voice low and earnest. I came here looking for work, maybe a place to rest before moving on. I never expected to find a home. I never expected to find you. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Gabriel, let me finish, he said gently. I know you've been hurt. I know you've learned to expect people to leave, but I told you I'd be here tomorrow and the day after, and I meant it. I want to build that cabin as a first step, and then, if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you. Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. Are you asking to court me, Gabriel Reed? His smile widened. I'm asking to marry you, Abigail Parker, though I'd be honored to court you first if that's what you prefer. Joy bloomed in Abigail's chest, so intense it was almost painful, but old fears died hard. How can I know you won't change your mind? That someday the horizon won't call to you again. Gabriel's hands tightened around hers. Because for the first time since the war ended, I don't feel the need to keep moving. When I look at the horizon now, all I think is that it's the same sky that's over you, and that's enough for me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a ring, simple but beautiful, with a small turquoise stone set in silver. I traded that Mustang for this in town last week. The jeweler said turquoise is the color of the southwestern sky. I thought it fitting. Abigail stared at the ring, then at Gabriel's hopeful face. All the doubts, all the fears that had built up over years of disappointment warred with the undeniable truth before her. This man had proven himself over and over. He had stood by her when he could have run. He had seen her strength and her vulnerability and valued both. You said once that everyone's looking for something, Gabriel reminded her softly. I've found what I've been looking for, Abigail. I've found you. Abigail felt the last of her resistance crumble. She slipped one hand free of his grasp and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with trembling fingers. And I've found you, she whispered, against all odds, against all my better judgment. Is that a yes? Gabriel asked, hope lighting his eyes. Abigail laughed, a sound of pure joy that she had almost forgotten she could make. Yes, Gabriel Reed. Yes, I will marry you. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Perhaps it had been everything in her life, all the hardship and loneliness, had been leading her to this moment, to this man. Gabriel rose from his knees, drawing her up with him. His hands cradled her face with infinite gentleness. May I kiss you, Abigail Parker, soon to be Abigail Reed? I'd be very disappointed if you didn't, she whispered. His lips met hers in a kiss that started tender and quickly deepened into something that made Abigail's knees weak. His arms wrapped around her, strong and secure, as if he would never let her go. And for the first time in years, Abigail truly believed that someone would stay. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. I'll be here tomorrow, he promised, and every tomorrow after that. And I'll be here waiting, Abigail replied, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Redemption Creek, with half the county in attendance. Joseph Thompson stood as Gabriel's best man, and the blacksmith's wife, Emma, stood for Abigail. The celebration afterward was the most joyous the town had seen in years, with music and dancing that lasted well into the night. When they finally returned to the ranch, their ranch now, truly shared, Gabriel swept Abigail into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Welcome home, Mrs. Reed, he said, his voice husky with emotion. Abigail wound her arms around his neck, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. I've been home all along, she said. I was just waiting for you to find your way here. Gabriel's cabin on the rise never got built. Instead, they expanded the main house the following spring, adding rooms for the family they both hoped to have. The ranch prospered under their joint care, with Gabriel's knowledge of horses complementing Abigail's skill with cattle. A year after their wedding, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Abigail took Gabriel's hand and placed it on her slightly rounded belly. "We'll need that extra bedroom sooner than we thought," she said, her eyes shining. Gabriel's face transformed with wonder as he understood her meaning. "A baby, we're having a baby," Abigail nodded, laughing at his expression of pure joy. "Come spring, there will be 3 of us at this table." Gabriel gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you, Abigail Reed," he whispered against her hair, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, nestling into his embrace, "my cowboy who stayed." Their daughter, Grace, was born on a perfect spring morning in 1877, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. She was joined 2 years later by a brother, Thomas, named for the husband Abigail had lost, but now could remember with fondness rather than pain. The years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The railroad came through 20 miles south, opening new markets for their cattle. A small school was built in Redemption Creek, where Grace and Thomas learned alongside the children of other ranchers and townspeople. Gabriel was elected to the territorial legislature for a term where he fought for the rights of small ranchers against the encroaching cattle barons. Through it all, through drought and prosperity, through birth and occasional hardship, Gabriel and Abigail remained steadfast partners. Each morning began with them sharing coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the land they both loved. Each evening ended with them side by side, planning tomorrow's work, tomorrow's dreams. On their 10th anniversary, Gabriel presented Abigail with a gift, a small wooden box hand-carved with images of the ranch. The house on its small rise, the barn, the corral, the mountains in the distance. "Open it," he urged, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that still made Abigail's heart skip. Inside was a silver locket. When Abigail opened it, she found a tiny daguerreotype of their family, Gabriel, herself, Grace, and Thomas, taken on their last trip to town. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Gabriel fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin there. "To remind you that you're never alone," he said, "that I kept my promise." Abigail touched the locket, then reached up to touch his face, weathered now by years of sun and wind, but still as dear to her as ever. "You've kept every promise you ever made to me, Gabriel Reed." "And I always will," he replied, gathering her close. As they stood together, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Arizona sky, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had been so certain that happiness wasn't for her, that love would always be fleeting. She had said, "You'll leave like the rest," expecting disappointment, but Gabriel had said, "I'll be here tomorrow and always." And he had proven it day after day, year after year. Sometimes, Abigail thought, looking up at the man who had changed her life with his steadfastness, the bravest thing you can do is believe in someone else's promise. The most courageous act is to open your heart again after it's been broken. And sometimes, the greatest adventure isn't found chasing the horizon, but in staying still long enough to build something that lasts. "What are you thinking?" Gabriel asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Abigail smiled up at him, at the man who had taught her to trust again, to love again, to believe in tomorrow. "I'm thinking that home isn't a place," she said. "It's the people you love and who love you in return." Gabriel's arms tightened around her. "Then I've been home since the day I met you," he said simply. And in that moment, under the vast canopy of stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to lovers to family, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that some promises are kept, some loves do last, and some cowboys do stay. Forever,